$500 a barrel oil, $25 a gallon for your gasoline, $50 a gallon for your gasoline. The end is the opposite. But from a military point of view, we are now on the verge of the absolute critical period. And again, the question is, what are you going to do about it? And I'll try to show you what I recommend. Now, the other aspect of it is, if you get the mass bombing of Iran, we have a very clear perspective for the encirclement and destruction of the U.S. forces in Iraq. Now, everybody knows this stuff by now. We have the Kurds, we have the Shiites, and we have the Sunnis, Baathists, and so forth. The Kurds are pro-U.S., more or less, for their own reasons. The Shiites are neutral, and the Sunnis are doing the fighting. You have your famous Sunni triangle. This is where most of the fighting goes on, around Baghdad and these other places, Tikrit, Hamadi, Fallujah, and the rest of them. But here's the problem. All the supplies for the U.S. forces, the 150, 170,000 that are up here, have to come through that Persian Gulf that we just saw, which will be interdicted like mad. They're unloaded in Kuwait, and they go up this supply line. It's 2 roads, each 400 miles long, 800 miles of roads to defend. Now, all you have to do is put the Mahdi army with some bazookas and rocket-propelled grenades and what have you, these green arrows, along this road, and you can begin to destroy the tanker trucks, because everything is brought in by truck. The food, the water, the medical supplies, the ammunition, and everything else. What kind of gasoline does a tank consume? It gets about 1 mile per gallon if you're lucky. So the logistical needs are enormous. This is a logistical nightmare. Now, this area had been guarded by multinational forces. There used to be Poles, they're gone. Ukrainians, gone. Italians, gone. Spanish, gone, so forth. And it adds up to a lot. The British are now left here with 7,200. The British are now leaving. The British have announced the first third of their forces will leave. Isn't that interesting? Perfide Albion strikes again. The British, as usual, get out when the need is greatest. They're followed by the Danes immediately, and others are going to leave too. Only Georgia is willing to send more at the present time. Now, the Mahdi army is bad enough, but if you attack Iran, then you're going to have the Iranian thrusts across here. In other words, this jugular vein, if you will be cut. And these forces up here will be pocketed. They'll be encircled. They will be caught in a kind of Stalingrad situation where they can simply be wiped out. In other words, the problem in Iraq is not simply civil war that's happening to somebody else, but the encirclement and destruction of your own military forces. Now, it's worth avoiding this, because this debacle, this kind of a catastrophe, would probably be a catalyst for fascism on the home front. In other words, this kind of a catastrophic military reverse could be used by these desperate demagogues to impose a full dictatorship in this country. Now, this is too long to go through, but I did a detailed comparison, of course, between Bush in 2007 and Hitler in 42, 43. And it's actually uncanny. They're bogged down in their aggression. Bush is obsessed with Baghdad. Hitler was obsessed with Stalingrad. He fires his main generals, Abizaid Casey, Halder, List, von Kleist, von Bock, and so forth, von Brauchitsch. He brings in, the supply lines are in the hands of private contractors and South Asian drivers, guys from Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Philippines, and so forth. Hitler had Romanians, Hungarians, and Italians on the flanks, people who were not motivated to fight for this dream. And of course, the main thing is the retreat into a dream world, and the refusal to face military defeat and retreat. Save your forces. Don't have them wiped out and annihilated. So Bush and Hitler both retreating into a dream world of fantasy, intuition, and lunacy. And of course, the Anglo-American model of war has not fared well. I find when I give these speeches, most people still do not know that the Israelis were massively defeated in Lebanon last summer. They were mauled. They were mauled by the Lebanese Hezbollah. This is what happens when the Anglo-Americans, with their model of warfare, their aircraft and their tanks, go up against determined guerrilla forces. That's an invincible, impregnable, invulnerable Merkava tank of the latest type, and you see what happened to it. It fared rather poorly. This is the image of what's happening to the British and the NATO forces in Afghanistan, the US in Iraq, and very soon in Iran and what has happened to the Israelis in Lebanon. So this is a very bad bet. If you start a world war under these conditions, you're sure to lose it. That's the big argument against world war that anybody can understand. Don't start it because you'll lose it. And Afghanistan is even worse. This is even more landlocked. The logistical nightmare here between Peshawar and Kabul, the so-called, the myth-drenched Khyber Pass, of course. This can also be interdicted, and we're just waiting now for the Taliban's spring offensive to start. So this is a disaster also. Look how far inland that is, and it's all the way on the other side of the world. It's a tremendous logistical nightmare. So again, the attack on Iran is the end of the world as we've known it. We have to deal, first of all, with the fact that the United States is today controlled by a clique which traces its image directly back to Hitler. Carl Schmitt, Hitler's lawyer, had a protege, Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss is the guru for the neocons. There it is in a nutshell. They are the heirs of Hitler. We had a problem at the Phoenix conference. We had Holocaust deniers coming forward. This is absolute lunacy. Bush is in the Hitler tradition, not us. They're responsible for the Holocaust. His faction did it. We had no part in this. Cheney Doctrine. We're under the Cheney Doctrine. It's been in place since 2004, known since 2005. The Cheney Doctrine calls for a new 9/11 with weapons of mass destruction as a pretext for a nuclear attack on Iran. And this is part of the global strike program of the Pentagon. In other words, it's what Seymour Hersh wrote about a couple of days ago in the New Yorker, that Bush gives an order to nuke Iran one morning, and 24 hours later, the bombs and missiles fall on Iran. So to hit any point in the world within 24 hours, they think they have this, but of course only with nuclear weapons. Not a land invasion. They can't afford that anymore. So it's going to be breaching the nuclear taboo at this point. Now, we have this very important and authoritative warning. He's not a philanthropist. He is the person who started the Afghan war. And he boasts that he created the Afghan war of 1979 to 1989. He says, I brought down the Soviet Union with my Afghan war. So he knows how these things are done. However, he is a realist. He has contempt for the neocons. He says the neocons are obsessed with Israel. He's, of course, a petty Polish aristocrat. And he says, look, forget mucking around in the Middle East. March on Moscow and you control the world. So that's his program. He has a factional difference with the neocons. He says, forget about Iran. It's worthless. Get to the point. Get to Moscow and Beijing, and then it's all over. So he gives this testimony to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, February 1st. There he is. Quite a tough customer in his own way. And again, not a humanitarian, but arguing from his own imperialist point of view what he says now. If the U.S. continues to be bogged down in a protracted, bloody involvement in Iraq, the final destination on this downhill track is likely to be a head-on conflict with Iran and with much of the world of Islam at large. That is already a world war. A plausible scenario for a military collision with Iran involves Iraq failure to meet the benchmarks, right, these mythical guidepost goals or whatever Bush talks about, followed by accusations of Iranian responsibility for the failure. Now this is where we are already, right, that Iran furnishes weapons, right, these anti-tank devices, IEDs, that this is somehow inadmissible. Right? Neocon mentality is it's okay, you can wage war, but nobody else can wage war. They imagine war as a one-way street, and if somebody else responds, they become indignant. I don't know. It's funny. Or, and this is the key, by some provocation in Iraq, or a terrorist act in the U.S. blamed on Iran.